Chapter 10. For the following days, Enshli did nothing much but sit around his blaze. The only times he would leave his dwelling were when he had to replenish his materials, or when he went off to collect tinder. But it wasn't frequent, just once every few days. So for lengthy stretches, he would lovingly look at his own fiery creation. It was an obsession bordering the realm of paternal love. A bit weird, perhaps, but somewhat understandable. At first, his tribe would inquire about his methods, but he didn't give a straight answer.
Watch and learn.
He would always reply cheerfully.
Watch and learn.
It wasn't that he didn't want to teach them. It was just that he had no way of explaining. After all, he obtained this skill through mere observation and, well, with a ton of patience. But the others couldn't afford to be this patient. They had to stack up for the winter, so they left him to his own devices and went off to hunt. Their prey was thinning out fast. There was no time to spare. Learning could come later. It worked for him. After all, being the only one who could wield fire was an honorable title. As the weeks passed, the temperature started to drop. The mild autumn coolness left in a hurry as the relentless winter silently slipped in, bringing with it a terrible frost. Snow began to fall. They scattered from the heavens in droves and painted the earth white once more. Ice began to form on the water's surface, and even the largest of lakes started to freeze over. Everyone expected it. The cold always arrived in all its wretched glory, whether you liked it or not. But there were never enough preparations. For the past years, they dreaded it with all their heart. But this time, they thought, watching Enshli and his flame, as a sense of pride and hope started to balloon in their chests. Maybe this time, it would be quite all right. And soon enough, the inevitable winter harshness arrived. Soundlessly, she hid behind the sublime elegance of the snowy landscape as she stretched out her diabolical claws and laid siege to the cave. But whatever she tried, she just couldn't get in. A wall of warmth stood guard at the entrance. A mighty sentinel, it effortlessly deflected everything that was thrown at it. Sometimes its energy started to run out, and the fiery shield weakened accordingly. But there was nothing to fear. Another dozen attempts by Enshli, he still hadn't perfected it, and the blaze was as powerful as ever. Everyone looked on with utmost respect as he worked his magic. They knew that the presence of a renewable flame would be a valuable asset, but they never guessed that it would be this effective. True to his words, Enshli had protected the tribe. Maybe not from the forest predators, as he had once sworn, but from an intangible beast that was equally as dangerous and cunning. As the season went on, many of the members, having witnessed the effectiveness of Enshli's work, had flocked together to study the ways of fire-making. They would assist Enshli in gathering the materials and would pay unwavering attention as he began his ritual. They tried it themselves. At first, none could make even a glint. After all, it was to be expected. Gradually, some dropped out of the course.
I'll be off to polish my hunting skills.
They would downheartedly declare.
I'm just not cut out for this.
And off they went. With time, only a handful remained. They never faltered as their hands became rough and bruised and calluses began to form. In time, one by one, sparks flew out of their rocks, and with that, they graduated from the academy. While they improved, Enshli's progress never stopped. Through countless attempts, he discovered the best angle to bash the rocks, as well as the best materials to pick and the best methods to dampen arm fatigue. Now, it just took him a few tries before he would taste success. With his legion, the fire kept burning at every moment, from dusk till dawn, and from dawn till dusk. In most hours, Enshli would watch over it himself. He loved his job, and no one could take it from him. It was only when a dark veil shrouded the skies and drowsiness came beckoning did he reluctantly give up his esteemed position to one of his students. They took turns to guard the fire until the greatest one rose up from the hills in the shape of a glowing orange orb. And just like any other season, winter's time was up. Ultimately, unable to break through the defenses, she crept away in shame. For her, it was a total loss, and while she persistently returned time and time again with a full frosty arsenal at her supreme command, her losing streak just went on. Enshli lived through the years. He never relinquished his control over his fire. No matter how long had passed, he was still the main man that kept it going, although he did receive assistance here and there. Sometimes he got bored, so he experimented with the flame. And through repeated efforts, he could now help with the hunting, even with a disabled leg. No, he didn't magically get up and run off into the forest with a blazing torch and a wild thirst for meat. He helped with the manufacturing of weapons instead. To make a spear, a stone tip is not really required. A sharpened wooden pole can still pass as one. Everyone had known this for ages, but not only was that not as effective, it still took a few hours to make. For those who had lost their stone version, this wasn't a quick fix. But not anymore. Fire was the answer. A shortcut, even. By roasting the tip of a wooden pole in the fire repeatedly, Enshli discovered that a black substance would form. He would then remove it with a blade of flint every time. The more he removed, the sharper the spear became. The whole process was swift, just 45 minutes, and it was complete. Even still, it was not as sharp and deadly as its stone counterpart, and the increased hardness was offset by a rather brittle spine. But if a substitute was needed with immediate haste, it was perfect. There was one particular thing he loved doing. It was performing a show. A colorful show. For ages, he had picked up objects lying here and there and cast them into the fire for no good reason at all. Most of the time, they were just reduced to black soot. But very occasionally, a peculiar phenomenon would take place. The fire was no longer purely a mixture of red, orange, yellow, and white. Tints of all kinds spewed out in dazzles of light. In an instant, the cave would be illuminated with a terrific splendor of lilac, pink, cyan, and more. It was absolutely brilliant. The kids especially enjoyed the spectacle. They would never stop asking Enshli to do it again. It was hard work finding the right substances over and over, but when fits of laughter reverberated throughout the caves, all the effort was paid in full. Did he have any kids of his own, you ask? Well, apart from his fire, he actually did, and I was just about to move on to that. 10 years had passed by then. Enshli was in his 30s. He had grown close to a female. She was one of the first to have learned fire making from him. They experimented together, observing any interesting happenings, mostly a lack thereof, to be frank, with boundless interest and anticipation. They shared the same joys and went through the same lows. As the waves of heat brought them crests and troughs, they braved all of them as one. Quite naturally, one thing led to another, and voila, a child was born. The child, similarly, was nameless, but perhaps I shall bestow a name upon him. Pyru, from the word pyro, which is from the Greek word per, meaning fire. An apt name, if I would say so myself, for someone who was quite very literally born from the flames of passion. Enshli treated Pyru with love and care, just like how his father had done many years ago. The condition of his leg had stabilized over the years, yet every step still caused him a considerable amount of pain. Even so, he still performed his fatherly duties. He would bring Pyru into the forest and would lecture him about the grass, the trees, the deer, the birds, and everything, big or small, that had made this lush expanse of land their home. Pyru loved the animals. It fascinated his inquisitive young mind. Whenever he laid his eyes on one he especially liked, he would toddle over to it with his chubby legs without even the slightest trace of fear. It took Enshli everything he had to stop Pyru from doing so. One slight mishap and the results would be nothing short of disastrous. Enshli treasured their time together.
You never know what's gonna happen.
He would say to Pyru, with a cloud of melancholy gathering in his eyes. Pyru would scratch his head and waddle off. He didn't know what Enshli meant, and Enshli hoped that he would ever have to. Most of the time, Enshli would still remain seated in front of his fire. He really didn't have the stamina to explore the forest all day long. His partner sat with him, cradling Pyru in her arms. Pyru was just as interested in the flame as in the creatures. To him, the way it flickered, waved, and spewed and pranced kept reminding him very much of one.
Is it alive?
He would question. The answer was always no, but he was never convinced. Enshli would use all his fiery know-how to amuse Pyru. By now, he had a few more up his sleeve. When their bellies started to rumble, he would grab a piece of meat. But he didn't just ravenously munch on a raw stalk, he would skewer it on a stick and roast it on a fire. Soon, an enticing aroma would drift out, and Pyru's mouth would dribble with saliva. Pyru loved this dish. It was not as chewy, and the outsides were crunchy. To him, it was far better than the ones that dripped with gore. As for the others, well, they were long used to eating their meat raw. To them, the cooked texture just felt different. But no, they didn't hate it at all. Some were fine with it and would even put in a request for it every now and then. On other occasions, Enshli would collect lumps of specific minerals, goethite and hematite, from the soil. He would leave them separately in the fire and let them smolder and burn. And with time, powdery dyes would emerge. Brown for the former and red for the latter. The father, mother, and son would then dip their fingers in them, and the entirety of the cave was their canvas. At first, they would place their palms on the walls and trace the outlines with color. Then, once they became familiar with it, they would draw the animals they had encountered that day. The other tribe members would follow suit. They painted the scenes of their hunts and the images of their friends and anything else they wanted. Soon, the cold, bleak stone walls were overflowing with a blast of vibrance and life. It was a time of peace.